Chapter 1: The Legacy of the Past. German Particularities. Is it wrong to begin with Bismarck? On several levels. He was a key figure in the coming of the Reich. In one scene, the cult of the memory in the years of his death have encouraged many Germans to long for the return of strong leadership his name represented. For another, his action and policies in the mid to late 19th century have helped to create an ominous legacy for the German future. Yet in many ways, he was a complex and contradictory figure. As much as European, as German, as much as the modern traditional here too. His example points towards the tangled mixture of the new and old was so characteristic of the Third Reich. It was calling to mind that mere 50 years separated Bismarck's foundation to German Empire in 1871 from electoral triumph of the Nazis from 1930 to 1931. There was a connection between two seemed impossible to deny. It was there, rather than in the remote religious culture and hierarchical polities of the Reformation or the enlightened absolutism of the 18th century, that we find the first real moment in German history which is possible to relate directly to the coming of the Third Reich in 1933. Born in 1815, Otto von Bismarck made his reputation as a wall-man of German conservatism, given to brutal statements of violent actions, never afraid to state the forceful clarity what more cautious spirits was afraid to say out loud. Coming from a traditional aristocratic background, rooted in the Junker land-owning class and the civil service nobility, he seems to many represents Prussianism in extreme form. With all virtues and vices, his domination ever over German politics in the second half of the 19th century was brutal, arrogant, and complete. He could not conceal his contempt for liberalism, socialism, parliamentarism, egalitarianism, and many other aspects of the modern world. Yet it seems to do no harm to the almost messianical reputation he acquired after the death as a creator of the German Empire. On the centenary of his birth in 1915, when Germany is in the midst of fighting the First World War, the humane liberals such as historian Friedrich Menig would take comfort, even inspiration, from the image of the Iron Chancellor as a man of force and power. In the spirit of Bismarck, he wrote, which forbids us to sacrifice vital interests and have force to the heroic decision to take up prestigious struggle against the East and West, to speak with Bismarck, like a strong fellow who had two good fists at his disposal, one for each opponent. Here was a great and decisive leader whose like many Germans feel acutely as this critical juncture of the country's fortunes. They have felt the absence of such a leader even more acutely after the war have ended. And in reality, Bismarck was far more complex character than his crude image. To foster his acolytes after his death, he was not reckless, risk-taking gambler in the later legend. Too few Germans was consequently remembered that it was Bismarck who was responsible for defining the politics as art of the possible. He always insisted that his technique was to calculate the way the events are going and take advantage of them for his own purpose. He himself put it poetically. A statesman cannot create anything himself. He must wait and listen until he hears the steps of God sounding towards events and leap up and grasp them in his garment. The Bismarck knew that he could not force events to happen into any pattern he wanted. If then to adopt another of his favorite metaphors, the art of politics consists in navigating the ships of the states to a stream of time. In what direction was the stream falling in the 19th century Germany? far more than a millennium before the century began. Central Europe have splintered into minute autonomous states, some of them powerful and well organized, like Saxony and Bavaria. As a small or middle-sized free cities, the tiny principalities or knighthoods, which consist a little more than a castle and modestly sized estate. These were all gathered together in the so-called Holy Roman Empire, founded Charlemagne in 800 and dissolved by Napoleon in 1806. This was the famous thousand-year Reich, which ultimately became Nazis' ambitions to emulate. By the time it collapsed under the weight of Napoleon's invasions, the Reich was in a precarious condition. Attempts to establish ambitious member states such as Austria and Prussia have tended to increasingly to throw their weight around the Reich that did not exist. When the dust settled Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815, the European states set up a successor organization in the Reich in the form of German Confederation, whose border were roughly the same as included, as before, as German and Czech-speaking part of Austria. For a while, the police system established through the Central Europe by the Austrian Chancellor Prince Metternich successfully kept the lid of the boiling cauldron of liberal and revolutionary activity still among the active minority of educated people before 1815 by the French. Yet by the middle in the 1840s, a new generation of intellectuals, lawyers, students, and local politicians has grown dissatisfied with the situation. They came to believe that the quickest way to get rid Germany from its many great and petty tyrannies was to sweep away the individual member states of the Confederation and replace them with single German polity founded on the representative institutions and guaranteeing the elementary rights and freedoms, the freedoms of speech, the freedom of press, and so on. In 1848, revolutionary breakout in Paris and flashed across Europe. Existing German government was swept away and liberals came to power. The revolutionary quickly organized election in the Confederation, including Austria, a national parliament duly assembled in Frankfurt. After much deliberation, the deputy voted through a list of fundamental rights and established German constitutions along the classical liberal lines. But they were unable to gain controls over armies of two leading states, the Austria and Prussia. This proved decisive. In the autumn of 1848, they refused to accept a new constitution, and after a wave of radical democratic revolutionary activity swept across Germany, and following spring they forcibly dissolved the Frankfurt Parliament and sent its deputies home. The revolution was over. The Confederation was re-established, and the leading revolutionary was arrested, imprisoned, or forced to exile. The following decade has been widely seen by historians as a period of deep reaction. The liberal values and civic freedoms was crushed under the Iron Heel was under the German authoritarianism. Many historians have regarded the defeat of 1848 revolution as a crucial event in modern German history. At the moment, the historian A.J.P. Taylor's famous phrase, Germany reached its turning point and failed to turn. Yet Germany did not embark a straight of or undeviating special path towards aggressive nationalism and political dictatorship after 1848. There were many avoidable twists and turns along the way. To begin with, the fortunes of liberals have undergone a dramatic transformation once more at the beginning of the 1860s. Far from being a complete return to old order, the post-revolutionary statesmen have sought to appease many of the liberals' demands while stopping the short of granting either the national unification or parliamentary sovereignty, a trial by jury in an open court, equality before the law, freedom and business enterprise, abolition of most objectionable forms of state censorship of literature and the press, the rights of assembly and association, and many much more. were in place almost everywhere in Germany by the end of 1860s. And crucially, many states have instituted the representative assemblies which elected the deputies have the freedom of debate and enjoy at least some rights over legislation, the rising of state revenues. It was precisely the last night of the resurgent liberals used in Prussia in 1862 to block the raising of taxes until armies was brought under the control of the legislature. As it had fatally not have been in 1848, this posed a serious threat to funding Prussian military machine. In order to deal with the crisis, the Prussian king appointed a man who was become the dominant figure of the German politics for the next 30 years, Otto von Bismarck. By this time, the liberals had correctly decided that there was no chance for German uniting. As in 1848 in nation-states that included the German-speaking Austria, that would have meant that break up of the Habsburg monarchy, which included huge swaths of territory, from Hungary to northern Italy, that lay outside of boundary of the German Confederation, and included many millions of people who spoke the language other than German. But the liberal also considered that following the unification of Italy in 1859 to 1860, the time had come. If the Italians had managed to create their own national state, then surely the German would be able to do so as well. The Bismarck belonged to a generation of European politicians, like Benjamin Disraeli in Britain, Napoleon III in France, or Camillo Cavour in Italy, who were prepared to use radical, even revolutionary means to achieve fundamentally conservative ends. He recognized that the force of nationalism was not going to be gainsaid, but also saw that after frustration of 1848, many liberals would be prepared to sacrifice at least some of their liberal principles on the altar of national unity to get what they want. In a series of swift and ruthless moves, Bismarck allied with the Austrians to seize the disputed Duchies of Schleswig-Holstein from the Kingdom of Denmark, and engineered a war over the administration between the Prussia and Austria, which ended in complete victory for the Prussian forces. The German Confederation collapsed, and followed by the creation of successor institutions without Austrian and other South German allies named by Bismarck for the want of a more imaginative terms of Northern German Confederation. Immediately, the majority of Prussian liberals, sensing that the establishment of the national state was just around the corner, forgave the Bismarck for his policy of collecting taxes and funding the armies without parliamentary approval. They rightly feared the creation of united Germany would spell out the end of predominant European power politics which they had enjoyed over the past decade and a half. The crushing of the French armies in Sedan and elsewhere followed the proclamation of a new German empire. The whole of mirrors as the former French royal palace of Versailles, built by Louis XIV, the Sun King, at the height of his power nearly 200 years before. The palace was now turned into a humiliating symbol of French impotence and defeat. This was a key moment in modern German and indeed the European history. To liberals, it seems fulfillment of their dreams, but there were heavy price for them to pay. Several features of Bismarck's creation had ominous consequences for the future.